Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in his opening remarks, the Chair addressed the evolution of this threat and why Member States have agreed to review the Madrid Guiding Principle. Executive Director Konings mentioned the consultation process. CTED role in leading this process stemmed from our mandate in paragraph 14 of Security Council Resolution 2395. Under Resolution 2395, CTED is asked to support the CTC by advising it on practical ways to implement the relevant resolutions. Since the adoption of Resolution 2396, CTED has conducted 15 assessment missions in which it learned a great deal about the challenges and good practices Member States identified in the implementation of the resolution. CTED thematic and research expertise have also informed our understanding of the challenge. Guided by OP14, CTED worked with its relevant partners, including the GRN, to support the work of the CTC. In particular, it supported a workshop at the World Counter-Terrorism Summit held in Herzliya, Israel, on new challenges relating to the return of foreign terrorist fighters. It supported a workshop with the Soufan Center in Doha, Qatar, focusing on policies and actions to address the threat of returnees. CTED at the Global Center hosted an interactive briefing with civil society organizations. The Chair held a few weeks ago an open briefing for Member States, informing them of the process and providing them with opportunity to voice their concerns and suggestions for the review of the Madrid Guiding Principle. Lastly, this morning, CTED organized a side event with the International Conference of Data Protection and Privacy Commissioners on data privacy in light of Member States' obligations under Resolution 2396. Throughout the process, we received a large number of contributions from Member States, international and regional organizations, and the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and while countering terrorism, highlighting issues and concerns relating to the review process. CTED collated and analyzed this data and provided practical advice to the CTC for the review process. This is indeed a whole of office work at CTED. I would like to thank my colleagues in CTED for all the hard work and efforts they have made in support of the CTC. In the briefing held on the 20th of November, we highlighted the key issues the reviewed Madrid Guiding Principles will address. We recommended the CTC to focus in particular on the new requirements, and there are quite a few of them, that the resolution introduced. With our own 15 assessment missions and the added contributions and following 3 weeks of intensive discussions, we have a much clearer sense of the specific dimension for each requirement of the resolution. The PowerPoint before you, which will be available right as we finish this session, can give you a good sense of the specific issues relating to each aspect of the resolution. I should stress that as the process is still ongoing, including in particular taking into account the consultative nature of the meeting today, new issues may come for CTC consideration. Let me begin with the first issue that was already mentioned by the Executive Director, API and PNR. The obligation in Resolution 2396 of Member States to implement API and PNR systems only heightens the need to provide guidance on this issue. In addition to addressing legislative and oversight issues, CTC members are looking into the use of ICAO standards and recommended practices and the establishment of passenger information units to ensure lawful practices. Another area where Resolution 2396 introduced a new concept was relating to watch lists and database. In an effort to address the many human rights concerns raised in watch lists, FTFs and associated persons, CTC members look into the issue of data management and security measures. They also discuss inclusion criteria, placing children on database, authorized access, information sharing, and effective oversight. Biometric was already mentioned as a new area that the Council has looked into and required Member States to implement biometric systems to responsibly and properly identify terrorists. CTC members are looking for ways to help member states implement the concepts of responsible and proper use. This includes procedural safeguards and oversight, lawful responses to biometric matches in compliance with international law. It also addresses the rights of vulnerable populations and the importance of information sharing via interoperable systems, oversight, and ethical issues that may arise from this use. Countering terrorist narratives. In their discussions, member states look at the role of counter-narratives to prevent and counter incitement and recruitment to commit acts in a resolution, as mentioned in Resolution 2354 and 2396. This includes effort to address underlying drivers of radicalizations, tailor narratives to local contexts, and specific concerns on how member states can partner with private sector and civil society organizations. The resolution also calls upon member states to develop and implement risk assessment tools to identify individuals who demonstrate signs of radicalization to violence. This is a new requirement. Member states will benefit, surely, from the sharing of experience and from extensive guidance that exists on this issue. Member states we interacted with look into issues relating to the involvement of expert professionals and anti-discrimination measures and a gender perspective. They also wish to see more exchanging of expertise with other states and organizations in order to improve their tools. In the area of investigation and prosecutions of FTFs, CTC members work to incorporate recent trends, particularly terrorist use of the internet and the challenge of admissible evidence. Issues area include the use of information and evidence collected from conflict zone, the use of digital data as evidence and necessary cooperation with the private sector. Specific attention is given by the CTC to the use of financial intelligence in investigation and prosecution, as well as ways to address linkages with transnational organized crime. PRR strategies for FTFs and their accompanying family members is a concept introduced in Resolution 2178. But since the adoption of this resolution, we benefited from much experience and dozens of missions conducted by CTED since then, and the CTC is looking for ways to integrate all the new knowledge and all the shared experience in a way that could ease member states dealing with this challenge of developing effective prosecution, rehabilitation, and reintegration strategies. The potential for recruitment and radicalization in prisons is also a new concept introduced in Resolution 2396. CTED has started integrating this new requirement in its assessment missions and was also able to refer the CTC to guidance and good practices in the area of risks and need assessment, detention conditions, prison staff, targeted pre- and post-release measures and programs, as well as oversight mechanism. Resolution 2341 calls on member states to improve strategies for reducing risks to critical infrastructure from terrorist attack. CTED was able to refer the CTC to guidance on awareness of terrorist risks, action plans, preparedness measures, and interoperability, including its recently developed compendium on the issue. The resolution also stressed the need for states to develop, review, and amend national risk and threat assessments to take into account potential attacks against soft targets. CTED was able to refer the CTC to the experience gained by the so many members who have been attacked in the last few years in the urban spaces, to guidance that exists on risk assessments, contingency plans, public-private partnership, and capacity development. Cooperation among relevant stakeholders is a key element in the protection of soft targets, and the CTC pays particular attention to cooperation with local partners. It is understood that this is essential for successful contingency planning for attacks on both critical infrastructures and soft targets. There are 4 issue areas that cut across the challenges posed by FTF returnees, relocators, and their families. First is gender. The CTC looks into ways to incorporate a gender perspective into counter-narrative measures, intervention programs, criminal justice measures, prosecution, rehabilitation, and reintegration strategies, cases involving children, and prison programs. Women's participation, particularly in the development and implementation of counter-narrative measures and prosecution and rehabilitation and reintegration strategy, is a key element, and we highlighted those issues for CTC consideration. Second issue the resolution pays an important emphasis on is families and children. FTF's families and children are often involved in their activity, and they require special attention. The protection and promotion of the right of the child are essential in multiple contexts related to the implementation of the resolution, from biometrics to watch lists, investigation and prosecution, PRR, and detention. They required tailored strategies that put upfront the right of the child. Third, civil society. Civil society is an essential partner for member states and IROs across the counterterrorism space. CTC members look these days into ways civil society participation can support and enhance the implementation of the resolution. We are very glad to see a large number of civil society participants attending this meeting and contributing to the revision process. Lastly, human rights. Measures taken to counter terrorism must comply with obligation under international law, in particular international human rights law, refugee law, and international humanitarian law. The human rights issues that the resolution raises are numerous, and the CTC is looking for ways to provide further guidance to member states on human rights challenges relating to the implementations. I mentioned several of them, but they're particularly relevant to the issues of counterterrorism measures, targeted intervention practices, biometric, watch list, detention conditions, among others. Lastly, one of the main challenges member states raised with us is the challenge of implementation and the challenge of capacity. CTC members are aware of the need to invest more capacity building in order to see faster and wider implementation of the more complex aspect of this resolution. They also decided to dedicate the last panel of today's meeting to the issue. I thank you all for your attention, and I hope this presentation has been informative for our discussion today, and we look forward to the fruitful engagement today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.